Hello chaps and chapettes, how's it going? Screezilla here, and I do hope you are well today. Now, today I'm not doing a history of a plane. I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a history of but a part of a plane. A very important part, some may say. Others may say it was a waste of money and time. Today I'm going to be looking at the Norden Bomb site. A device developed by Carl Norden, costing over $1.5 billion to develop and produce, and was made with the highest security measures and had the same security levels as the Manhattan Project at the time. It also cost half of what the Manhattan Project actually cost. Yes, to give you an idea how expensive this bomb site was, the $1.5 billion spent on it was half of what was spent on the development of the nuclear bombs, which had a $3 billion cost. You can see how crazy that is. Now, Carl Norden was a Dutch engineer and deeply religious man. He was educated at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, where it said he shared a class with one Vladimir Lenin, a guy that some Russians may know. Norden poured time and effort into making a more accurate bomb sight. He believed it was God's will to end suffering of civilians and non-combatants, so the bombs would only hit their intended targets. Born in 1880, he passed away in Switzerland, in Zurich actually, in 1965. Interestingly, he was not told of the Norden bomb site being used with the B-17s, the Enola Gay and Boxcar, dropping the nuclear bombs on Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and wow, my brain just went dead there for a second. Interestingly, as I say, he was not told, as this went against his wishes for the site to save civilian lives and not take them. However, I'm sure he would have found out after the war his site was used in dropping those bombs. Norden, who was now an expert on gyroscopic technology and stabilization in 1911 onwards, he joined the US Navy and actually started work on the Hewitt-Sperry automatic aeroplane, an American attempt to make a flying bomb, basically, the world's first cruise missile. This gave the military a good insight into Norden's knowledge of gyroscopes. World War I saw a huge development in bomb sites with the CSBS, Course Setting Bomb Sight, which was basically a giant mechanical calculator. It allowed for the crews to counter into effect wind, which before this device was a huge issue. However, this device had one large flaw, and that was that the plane needed to be perfectly level for it to work correctly. Even a small error in leveling off the aircraft would make the site highly inaccurate. This led to the sights being developed with gyroscopic stabilizers, and various sights were designed, still lacking accuracy but better than what they were before. Another large issue with the CSBS was it allowed correct calculations for the proper flight angle needed to correct for wind. The device was normally not visible to the pilot, so the pilot couldn't see what was going on. The bombardiers were often placed in front of the pilot and had to indicate to the pilot for corrections of course via hand signals or early communication systems, basically just electric strings with microphones, and they weren't very good. However, the plane started to grow much larger, and this led to pilots and bombardiers in separate areas and no longer able to communicate with ease. The PDI, Pilot Direction Indicator, was mounted in many early bombers. This was a system that the bomb aimer used switches and levers to move a pointer that was located on the pilot's instrument panels. Then the pilot could follow the course set. So it was set somewhere around about on the dashboard of the plane here, and would basically point the pilot left or right. Norden's first modification to a bomb site was improving this system. Instead of having separate switches that the bombardier often had to look away from his scope to use, his idea was to make it part of the scope system itself. This meant that the bombardier could rotate the scope left or right to make changes to the pointer location. This later led to a powered system that worked with the autopilot systems to allow the bomb aimer to effectively fly the plane, giving it small adjustments to turn left and right to get it correctly on target. Next on the list was timed drop. Norden used an idea already in use in other bomb sites, the equal distance concept. This was based on the fact that the ground would remain relatively constant during a bomb run. The wind would not be expected to change dramatically over a short period of time, not be expected to change direction, of course. If you could mark the distance on the ground, or in practice an angle in the sky, nice ram there, timing the passage over that distance would give you the correct information needed for the time of the drop. The Norden version had a few changes. First, the bombardier looked up at the expected time it would take for the bomb to fall from the current altitude. This time was set into a countdown timer on the site. The bombardier would line the target up with the first cross. When the target crossed through the first line, the timer would start. The bombardier then twisted the sight to keep the target as they approached, keep it on target as they approached. This would put a small input into the plane to keep it on target. The movements were linked to a second crosshair on a gearing system that made it move twice as fast. The bomber would keep adjusting the plane until it reached the second crosshair. Once it reached this point, the bombardier would then know he was over the target and release the bombs for a much more accurate drop. Norden Bomb Sight was the first to be used by the Air Force in the Norden Bomb Sight was first used in the Air Force in the late 1920s. They did not like the system as they believed it was far too complex. A more synchronous system was developed, however. This new system was much simpler to use, meaning the bombardier no longer needed to look up at tables for pre-run measurements. Everything was carried out automatically through an internal wheel and disc calculator system. The Norden system was revolutionary at the time. In a time where bombs were a guessing game, this system led to the ability to drop bombs from around 4,000 feet into an area the size of a barrel. In testing, the bomb sight was highly accurate with static targets. It gave the Air Force a slight false sense of security, however. As it often encases in testing conditions, everything is easy. Once war was declared, the bugs of the system were found more and more. One major flaw of the gyros were in rough conditions and harsh movements. The system would need to be recalibrated. The other issue was it was designed in a time where bombs were dropped from around 4,000 feet. However, the new generation of bombers were now high-altitude bombers flying at over 20,000 feet. This also showed the second flaw in the system, which was that you needed visual contact with the thing you wanted to bomb. And while at 20,000 feet, this could often be hard, along with the fact that often the enemy would use smoke to hide the vital targets. Perfect landing there. Now we're just going to switch to another video. Welcome back. The US calculated that hitting a 30-meter target from 20,000 feet, there was a 1.2% probability of hitting a target of that size, meaning that they would need to send 220 bombers for hitting a target of 30 meters in width or diameter. This gave them a 93% chance of one or more bombs hitting the target. So the US Army Air Force made their combat groups around 251 planes to provide enough bombers to fulfill their plans. So it was very hit or miss, as you can sort of see there, and wasn't as accurate as early testing suggested, especially with the high altitude stuff. On the 18th of March 1943, the first mission was flown to Bremen-Wasgach, Germany. The 303rd Bombardment Group were estimated to have dropped 76% of their bombs within a 100-foot ring of their target. However, this was thought to have been a slight upped figure, as later missions proved that the bombers were far less accurate. It was found that only 50% of bombs dropped by Americans landed within a quarter mile of their target. American crews estimated 90% of their bombs would miss the target as well. It was found that only around 16% of bombs fell with a 1,000-foot aiming point of their target. However, accuracy was improved by the end of the war. In 1945, it was said that the bombers had a 60% chance of their bombs being on target. This was aided by the additional use of radar technology. However, by this time, precision attacks had been abandoned. There were some field-modified versions with iron sights attached to them, and these were used a little like the old-fashioned bomb sights. As you can see here, the Norden Bomb sight in the front there, manned by our bombardier. And these basically bomb sights fashioned like the old World War I bomb sights. You know, you just basically looked and guessed where you were bombing from. These were mainly used by the Doolittle Raiders and James Buck Dozier for attacking German submarines in the Caribbean seas. Generally, it was used for very low-level attacks, fast low-level attacks, not really your high-altitude stuff. When you got things like the B-17 and the B-29s, you know, and they were flying at 20 to 30,000 feet, it's very hard to hit a target because you can't really see that target. Anyway, one thing about the Norden site that was considered critical was its security. All bombardiers were required to take an oath during their training. They would defend its secret with their own lives if necessary. The bomb site was fitted with a thermite grenade. This would melt the site into a molten lump of slag so it could not be captured by the enemy. The Douglas TBD was equipped with a Norden sight along with special flotation bags in the wings to aid a crew's escape if they ditched into the water, and even allow the plane to be recovered in some cases. However, these were swiftly removed to allow the bomb sight to sink with the plane as quick as possible so not to be captured. Basically, they redesigned the TBD so it would sink quicker. You know, just crews, just don't worry about it. Just try and get out if you can. But we're more worried about this bomb sight. No photos were allowed of the bomb site, and it was to be stored in a special safe after each mission. And the safe was actually kept on the airfield in a special building. There were special officers that were looking after it. Nobody was allowed near them. They would carry the bomb site was carried out to the plane, handcuffed to a guard. It was that critical. Once it had been loaded onto the plane, there are even reports of armed guards standing by the plane to make sure no one would get on or off after the sites were loaded. That's how important these sites were. As the war went on, security was lowered, and the secrecy was lessened. However, it was not until 1944 that the first public display of the instrument occurred, and photos were actually allowed to be taken, or photos were actually allowed to be published of the site. Of course, this was all useless, as the Germans already had the plans and designs for the site. Before the war even started, one of the engineers working with Norden, Hermann Lang, was in fact a German spy and had passed over all the details and even had one built in Germany by 1938. In 1941, Lang, along with 32 other conspirators and German agents of the Dunkursine spy ring, were found and arrested. They were sentenced to around 18 years in prison. The German bomb site of the time was actually very similar and had the same gyroscopic system in them. The only part really lacking was the autopilot systems. The Carl Zeiss Lufthansa 7, or 7, was a highly advanced system. It wasn't until the late 1940s, however, that the Germans made the modifications for the autopilot system, as they started to use them on the Arado AR-234, which of course only had the single pilot, had no extra bombers on board. The other thing with German bombers, of course, the Heinkel HE-111s, they were relatively open, so the bombardier could actually talk to the pilot, get them on target. It wasn't really needed. It was a bit of extra technology that wasn't needed. Overall, in post-war tallies, the Norden site was seen to have around about a 30% accuracy rating, well below expected results. It was expected to be around about the 80% mark. In Europe, the problem was the clouds. In the Pacific, it was the altitude and the so-called jet stream above. When you get to around 30,000 feet, there's different winds, of course. You have winds going left and right, and it really makes things difficult. The Norden was designed for mid to light winds, mild to light winds, not the strong winds found at these altitudes. Another issue was the speed of the bombs. Once dropped, the shape, weight, design, heck, even the paint used changed the aerodynamic properties of the bombs, and there was no way at the time to calculate the trajectory of bombs travelling at supersonic speeds, and this was often the case when they were released from above 30,000 feet. The Norden site was in use, however, long after its initial design, from 1929 until 1973. It makes this bomb site a long-used item. Although there was some changes, of course, some modern radar systems were now being used more often for bombers, as nuclear weapons were more common and they did not need such pinpoint accuracy. There was a radar variant of the Norden bomb site for the B-47 Stratojet, and this had image of the radar and a viewfinder in the eyepiece, allowing for good accuracy. The last use of the bomb site was Operation Igloo White in the Vietnam War, using modified versions of the EC-121 Warning Star to drop air-delivered seismic intrusion detectors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Retired World War II technicians actually had to be hired and entered back into service to show the crews how to use these sites, along with how to repair and to calibrate them. And, well, really last but not least, the crosshairs of the site. One of the biggest claims, just going to pause it right here. I'm just going to spin around in the free camera, maybe, if it works. Now, this game was a complete waste of time for me, because the bomber that was taking out the right base decided to take his sweet time and not actually drop his bombs on the base. So, I'll just get a nice little image of the Norden site there. So, one of the biggest claims of the bomb site was the crosshairs. The rumours are that they tried to use the webbing of a black widow spider, as they needed a very fine wire for this bomb site, but it needed to withstand very high temperatures and pressure changes that happened when flying at around 20 to 30,000 feet. It was found that the spider web would break once above a set altitude and could not cope with the temperature changes. However, it was found that human hair that had never been treated with heat or chemicals would resist this. They believed the natural blondes were the best to use, and the best hair to use as well. An advert was placed in newspapers at the times, and most famous of them all, Mary Babkin Brown, who donated 34 inches of her hair. She declined any compensation, as she was doing it for the war effort. Now, this story has had many different people look at it, and it's often claimed as a hoax. Hair at the time was often used in scientific instruments, and especially meteorological ones. It is very possible that the early sites used human hair, especially while in the testing stages, but later variants of the Norden sites had etched lenses, using a diamond-covered cutter to etch a fine line in the site. From what I have seen, no Norden has been found that has actually human hair in it for the crosshairs. Another reason I believe the hair thing to be untrue is simply that hair could snap under pressure. It would also need to be replaced. I also question blonde hair, as it would be so fine that it may be hard to actually see and use, especially in bright conditions. Another issue I see with this is flexing. Although it would be under great tension, there is a chance that it could flex left or right slightly, or be thrown out of alignment with ease. So it's still a little bit of an unknown, but all evidence, it looks like it's an etched lens using a diamond to get such a fine point, rather than that of a human hair. So overall, the Norden Bomb site, with all that I've said, sounds like a bit of a failure. It looks like it was not worth any of that 1.5 billion spent on it. It did aid in high altitude bombers, although it was not as accurate as expected. It was far better than anything else they had at the time. In the Second World War, really the only true accurate way to deliver a bomb was to dive or drop at a very low altitude. The Norden site was a highly important aid and did help the war effort for America, although I do feel the 1.5 billion may be a little bit too much. They may have overspent on it. I don't really think it was worth all that much. For comparison, the RAF Mark 10 bomb sight was a much simpler design. It was designed for ease of use rather than accuracy, although it was used at much lower altitudes and mainly at night. It proved to be a good sight and nearly as accurate, if not more so, due to the low-level raids. It does feel a bit more like a publicity and propaganda thing for the Americans to say that they have this amazing bomb sight that, you know, can drop a bomb in a pickle barrel at 40,000 feet. You know, they sort of they upped it so much. They made people believe that this thing was capable of hitting a person from, you know, 20,000 feet in the air. They could hit like a brick or something, you know. It was completely falsified. There was actually one attack on a German chemical refinery plant where 85,000 tons of bombs were dropped. From that 85,000 tons, 16% of them managed to land within a 1,000 foot radius of the plant. 16% of those bombs were actually duds. The damage caused to this chemical factory put it out of commission for a week and a half, and that was all. So you could really look at that and say the Norden site did not prove very effective. It wasn't accurate at all, and that was generally the case. And well, with that, I'm going to wrap up this video, I think. Now, I've skipped over some of the things, and of course this is not a fully comprehensive video, but I do hope you found it interesting. The Norden site is often looked upon as this mythical, magical war-winning piece of technology, but in all truth, it did not aid that much. It is very important. It's a very important site, going from the golden age of flying from the 20s up to the nuclear age of the 70s, dropping bombs designed in the early 1900s to the latest, most advanced nuclear weapon, doomsday weapons of the day. Yes, it was amazing, and really, it truly is an incredible piece of technology at the time, as are all analog computers, really. But it wasn't the glorious, amazing wonder that a lot of people think it was. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've had a great day and enjoyed this video. And, well, this is Screenzilla out. Until next time, bye-bye.